Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Buchanan Kurzweil. First, I'd like to thank the conveners for inviting me to speak. And second, I'd like to acknowledge my co-authors at the University of Montpellier and the Andalusian Earth Science Institute. This work was a joint effort that was funded by the University of Montpellier and the European Research Council. Now, I'd like to draw your attention to the figures here, which show how shear wave velocity in mantle rocks changes with respect to pressure and temperature. On the left is a thermodynamic model, and on the right is a machine learning model. In simple terms, you can think of machine learning models in this case as computer programs that learn how rock properties evolve with respect to pressure and temperature. Notice the similarity in the patterns of shear wave velocity predicted by these two approaches. And in fact, the two models are essentially identical in terms of their predictions. The main difference between the two models and the focus of this talk is that machine learning models can make predictions much, much faster. Why is an improvement in prediction speed relevant? Well, our basic motivation was to address a limitation in numerical geodynamic models. Now, without going into much detail, implementing phase changes in geodynamic models is very costly computationally. That is to say, calculating rock properties dynamically during a simulation would significantly slow the simulation down. We hypothesized that this limitation could be overcome by machine learning models because machine learning models, in theory, can predict rock properties much faster. This talk will demonstrate our initial proof of concept that already outperforms commonly used methods by up to 1,000 times in terms of prediction speeds. And in this talk, I will cover the principal scientific challenge first, which was building a training data set that represents a variety of upper mantle compositions. And then I will show the performance and accuracy of the machine learning models we have tested so far. How are phase changes implemented in modern numerical geodynamic models? Well, lookup tables are a widely used approach. On the left is an initial setup for oceanic continental subduction, showing here the temperature and density fields. Notice that the density is rather featureless as we initialized our model with constant density for each rock type. If we want a more thermodynamically self-consistent density distribution, we can compute a density lookup table for each rock type, like the one shown on the right, which defines how density changes with respect to pressure and temperature. For example, our lookup table for mantle rock shows that density increases with depth as major mantle phases like olivine transition into denser phases. Since we know the pressure and temperature at each node in our model, we can look up what the density should be and then map that back to our model. Notice now how the density distribution of the mantle changes dramatically, which is much more consistent with geophysical observations and high pressure mineral experiments. The downside is that you potentially need a lot of lookup tables, which can get computationally expensive. Another approach would be to calculate phase equilibria during a simulation using Gibbs free energy minimization algorithms. This would be great because it could handle changing compositions, say by melting or fluid rock interactions. Not surprisingly though, this approach is much more expensive because a Gibbs free energy minimization algorithm would have to run at each node, which is impractical for high resolution simulations. So as an alternative to lookup tables and Gibbs free energy minimization approaches, we tested the practicality of using machine learning models. This approach has two components. The first is a large data set of thermodynamic calculations, and two, a regression algorithm that will learn patterns of rock properties from the training data set. In the end, you have a simple function that outputs an array of rock properties given a pressure, a temperature, and some value that represents the mantle's bulk composition. Now, the primary scientific challenge of this work was building a training dataset that covers a wide range of potential upper mantle conditions. The cartoon diagram here shows a stack of perplexed pseudosections, which is what our training dataset is. And it indicates that we need to define a range of pressures and temperatures that are relevant for the upper mantle, but also we need to define a range of bulk compositions for different rock types. For pressure and temperature, this exercise was pretty simple since we have good estimates of what upper mantle pressures and temperatures are. But for compositions, this was a lot trickier. We wanted to include a variety of mantle compositions, but in order to compute a perplexed pseudosection, these compositions need to be expressed in a number of major oxide components. Our training dataset therefore has 8 dimensions or 8 degrees of freedom in total, 2 for pressure and temperature and 6 for the major oxide components of a rock's composition. Now, ideally, we would like to reduce this to just 3 dimensions such that a rock's composition could be represented by a single scalar value. This is important for 2 reasons. First, it makes training the machine learning models easier, but also because geodynamic models typically don't track a range of major oxide components, but could potentially track a single scalar value that represents a rock's bulk composition. So how do we define the range of mantle compositions in our training data set? We turn to the natural rock record. This figure shows 311 geochemical analyses of natural peridotite samples in gray. And the colored data points represent hypothetical bulk mantle compositions that we sample between 2 hypothetical mantle end members, D sum and P sum. And for each one of these hypothetical mantle compositions, we calculate what we refer to as a fertility index, which represents how much that rock has been melted. Now, this fertility index is a single scalar value that essentially represents the rock's bulk composition, and this is what we use to train our machine learning models. Our final training dataset contains over 2 million thermodynamic calculations across an array of 128 different bulk mantle compositions, ranging from very fertile to very depleted. These depth profiles show how our training dataset compares to 2 geophysical models that are derived from seismological observations. In green are the geophysical models that show steps in different rock properties that are interpreted to be phase changes in Earth's mantle. The colored lines represent depth profiles of rock properties in our training dataset. And the important takeaway is that our training dataset shows good agreement with the geophysical reference models, with some deviations depending on the hypothetical bulk mantle composition in our training dataset. This figure here shows how prediction speeds of different approaches scale with model capacity, which is a proxy for the size or the predictive capability of each approach. The white region indicates the speed of perplex, the pink data points for lookup tables, and the blue-green data points for machine learning models trained with different regression algorithms. The main takeaway here is that machine learning models are up to 1,000 times faster than these other approaches, and that they scale more favorably as their capacity increases. In summary, machine learning models are fast and overcome the practical limitations of emulating dynamic phase changes in numerical simulations of mantle convection. With that, I'd like to thank you for your attention. I'm available for asynchronous online Q&A after the session, I believe. So please do reach out. Thank you.